I'm Chris Seislove, and I'm here today with
Eric Butler.
And we're going to be talking about XGO's line of products and just comparing, contrasting, probably arguing about base layer technology, outerwear technology, assault shirts, the whys, the whats, and ins and outs. So I'm a former Army infantry guy, and Eric?
Former law enforcement, about 10 years, spent the majority of that time on a tactical team.
Great. You weren't a real cop. Real cops work patrol. No, I'm just kidding. So we'll be comparing and contrasting these different contexts, all against the backdrop of XGO's product line. So before anything else goes on, you're probably going to have some sort of base layer, which is defined as like the bottom layer, underwear. The first thing that's going to go on before anything else goes on is your base layer. By principle, that base layer has to take moisture away from your body and hopefully transfer a bunch of heat with it as well. And then a bunch of stuff happens after that, but just sticking with base layer technology, ambient temperature of your operating environment, what it's going to start at, and then maybe what it's going to end at, because that's not always the same, is going to dictate like the level of performance of that base layer. So it might be next to nothing if it's super hot environment, or it might be quite a bit if it's like subarctic temperatures. Your base layer thickness, or in this case, like which phase you're going to run of XGO's like 4 different options. There's a lot to think about there. So if you pick one that's too light, you're probably going to what I call blow through it, which means you're just going to soak it out like quick because you're wearing phase 1. And then you find that your heart rate's at like 185 for 30 minutes because you got to get to the top of the mountain for whatever operational reason. And you just blew through your base layer, so now you're soaked. So probably should have picked something a little bit thicker in that case. But I actually don't know in your operational experience like what drove decisions on base layers or how you kind of worked that problem set.
I mean, it's basically the same. It's what your role is. So if like you're a patrol officer, depending on the season, summer or winter, you're going to pick your base layer. Obviously there's different ways people are wearing their ballistic protection in agencies these days. The more favored thing these days is the outer carriers, which helps a little bit mitigating with some of that heat entrapment. But it just depends on the season. A lot of agencies don't allow external carriers, and most people are wearing, or the conventional way of wearing your ballistic protection is under your duty shirt, but you need a base layer under that. Basically acts as a bridge between your skin and your ballistic panel itself. So you would want to choose something for whatever environment you're operating in, whether you're a long sleeve guy, short sleeve, what the season is. Yep. It just depends.
It takes a lot of, at least in my experience, a lot of like self-discovery. And what I mean by that is your level of fitness plus ambient air temperature, plus the things that you might need to do while you're wearing said base layer, that can change greatly, will kind of dictate to me what I can get away with. Of course, to know that, you actually have to get out and be like, how does my body react when I'm running at 180 degree heart rate for 25 minutes or 30 minutes? And then that can, and of course, what's the ambient air temperature, and is there going to be a lot of wind, and environmental factors, and all those things kind of combined would allow me to plan my base layers and my outer layers. Basically, when you screw up a base layer, you're going to be either very, very hot because you overdid it, or you're going to be freaking freezing because you're soaking wet because you blew through it. You don't have a mid, maybe you also screwed up a mid layer, which we'll talk about next. But you're either going to be way too hot or way too cold if you kind of don't do the research. Actually, research is a bad word. If you don't put in the practice to figure out like what environment you're going to be in, what kind of work you're going to realistically expect to do, and then what kind of fitness you got. And even if if you're well hydrated or you're not well hydrated. So there's a lot going into this. I remember the first real like technical course, I guess you could accurately say. We had a bunch of mountain climbers come in. And this is real early in this technology, like early 2000s. We had all these mountain climbers, like professional mountain climbers, show up and give us classes on like what now is common knowledge, thank God. And but that was like one of our key takeaways. It was like, wait a minute, you guys have all this figured out because you know exactly what your body's doing. If you're like ski trekking and you're like, well, I know if I hold this pace for 30 minutes, I'm gonna get this warm, and then I can stop in either up layer or down layer. And it was all correct, but it was like, man, that It's like a sniper getting dope. Like you got to get dope, so to speak, on your body, and then the activities you're doing to really nail down a base layer and a mid layer and an outer layer.
Right. I think that's important to know too, is knowing your body and its limitations, right? So some people are more hot natured. Some people, depending on humidity levels and where you're from and where you're operating at currently, that's going to vary greatly as well. So getting out, making sure you know your limitations and what your body does and reacts in different temperatures or temperaments. I don't know, is that a word?
Yeah, sure.
It's going to vary greatly for each individual, but the most important thing I think as well about base layering is comfortability, right? You want to make yourself, your body as comfortable as possible for whatever it is you're doing, because at the very least, if you have to carry all this gear and you can't get around it, if you have to wear a plate carrier and it's just not optional, it's needed for your job. At the very least, you want to make sure you're comfortable in doing that. What Chris was saying earlier about blowing through your gear, if you layer up too much underneath the carrier and you don't stack your layers correctly, basically what you're doing, you're setting yourself up for failure. It leads to the point where you're inside your head and you're constantly thinking about being soaked, starting to chafe, and then that's going to have a drastic effect on longevity and how you're operating.
Yeah, and from a fieldcraft standpoint, now that we're kind of airing this out, that's always how these things go. You start, you're like, oh yeah, it's all coming back to me now. If you're going to carry extra layers, carry extra base layers. Because that's the fastest, most effective thing you can switch out, basically. If you blow through your base layer and you're like, damn, man, now my mid layer's soaked, and like you said, I'm chafing, and this base layer is just pretty much counterproductive at this point. Carrying extra base layers with you is the smartest thing you can do. It's also, thankfully, the lightest and usually least amount of form factor is to carry extra base layers, because you can switch those out for probably the most effect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.